Some of you have great familiarity with the Rhodes Scholarships already, or with Oxford University, to which, of course, Rhodes alone sends scholars. But I thought what I'd do is just make some very general comments on themes that I think would be of interest and importance to you, focusing particularly on the kinds of things that you can do with your students. But my hope is very much that we'll have time afterwards for questions and answers, even though it's a large group. I think many of you who have questions are likely to have questions that will be of interest to others as well. As I said, there's so much information about the Rhodes Scholarships that's already available, and there are really no secrets. The problem, actually, I think that we have with the Rhodes Scholarships is not that there is inadequate information, but at times there's perhaps too much information, some of which, or much of which, is actually mythological. There's a price we pay for the fame of the scholarships. And I'm not suggesting in any way that the fame is deserved. Some of it is just a function of sheer history. We were really the first international fellowship, the first scholarship of any kind that, there may have been something in Bologna or Paris centuries before, but I don't think so. But in a real sense, the bequest of Cecil Rhodes is the granddaddy of virtually everything that's followed that brings students from one country to another with some kind of financial assistance. It's the father of other fellowships that you know about, in some cases by direct influence. In a sense, it's even perhaps the ancestor of junior years abroad and other kinds of international study. I think it's worth just mentioning a little bit about the history in Cecil Rhodes to give you a flavor for some of the criteria and what we're looking for, because to a remarkable degree, we are still true to the intent of the original benefaction. And that benefaction was extraordinary. It was one of the largest charitable gifts of its time. And the vision of Cecil Rhodes, I think, was really quite remarkable. Cecil Rhodes, of course, is not a person who is easily admired by today's standards. Or, if we look at him through the prism of the 21st century, it's hard to get around the imperialism, the colonialism, the obvious racism. And people I used to hear people try to defend his racial attitudes by saying that the will he established, he actually specified very clearly that no one should be disqualified by reason of race. He did say that, but what he meant by race was not just English, but Boers as well. But I'm sure he had absolutely no clue that we would be electing African Americans or Africans from other countries, black Africans, and indeed the first American black Rhodes Scholar was elected only in 1907, which was only 5 years after he died. But back to him and his vision, whatever one can think of his life and the values he led during his life, something clearly changed as he was thinking about his legacy and his benefaction. And if you read the various wills that he left, there were actually 7 wills and various codicils, it's really remarkable to trace the evolution of his vision. And some of the key things that animate us in what we do now originate in those later wills and codicils, and the language is very important. He used words like he was looking for scholars who would esteem public duties as their highest aim. He was looking for scholars who were not mere bookworms, probably thinking about himself and his rather undistinguished tenure at Oriel College, Oxford, when he was a student. He also, in one of the codicils, added scholarships not just to the countries specified, which were basically the British Empire at the time, were the countries specified, but very specially he set aside the United States as a key recipient and a disproportionate recipient. And that proportion that goes back to his will remains today. When today we elect 32 Americans, we've always elected 32, and in an international cohort of about 85. So we are the largest constituency of Rhodes Scholars at Oxford, but we at Oxford constitute only a minority of the scholars. But the reason that he had the United States in the scholarship, and the reason that he added Germany at the time, was that he wanted his scholars to contribute in some meaningful way to peace in the world. And he thought by taking the key powers in the world at the time, and he was prescient in the sense of the United States. It was not yet, obviously, World War I. It was not a sense yet that it was become the dominant power in the world in the 20th century. But he took the United States and Germany, as well as, obviously, the British Empire, and felt that if we could bring the outstanding young scholars from each of those countries and have them share a residential and academic experience in Oxford, it would make a difference in the world. And he thought that it could actually contribute in a meaningful way to world peace. So in a real sense, we are still influenced by, and we still cite the language in his will into what we are seeking. So I think it's important to keep in mind a little bit of that history. And just one other thing about the history, and again, given the fact that Cecil Rhodes himself and the life he led is not something that's admirable today, I think it's absolutely remarkable that Nelson Mandela, arguably, the most respected man in the world, lent his name so readily to association with that of Cecil Rhodes. We established about a decade ago the Mandela Rhodes Scholarships for Africans. And Nelson Mandela was very pleased, indeed, given his whole spirit of reconciliation in his life in South Africa. Maybe it's not surprising that he was so happy to lend his name together with that of Cecil Rhodes, the most powerful African, obviously white African of the century before. And we're quite proud of that association today. Again, because this audience knows a great deal about the scholarship, I want to leave some time at the end for questions, but I do want to just highlight some things that I think relate particularly to the things that you do. First thing I'd like to say, and some of this is inspired just by conversations with some of you in the hallways just in the last day, and it relates to the fact that I recognize for some of you there seems to be frankly, too much emphasis, if it may seem strange for me to say this, too much emphasis at your institutions on the Rhodes Scholarships per se. And this probably is also a reflection of the fame of the scholarships. I'm very familiar with how some college and universities trustees, some presidents, some deans, and no doubt in many cases your bosses, say, well, why haven't you produced a Rhodes Scholar? Or, we must produce a Rhodes Scholar. And I see how institutions, not surprisingly, although I'm not happy to see it, sometimes almost compete with each other and put Rhodes Scholars in their advertising and promotional materials. That's all understandable. But it I think puts too much emphasis, an unrealistic emphasis, on one scholarship. There are, and again, NAFA is all about this, many remarkable scholarships, some of which, as I said, inspired by the Rhodes Scholarships. The Fulbright Scholarships, William Fulbright was a Rhodes Scholar. David Boren is a Rhodes Scholar. The Marshall Scholarships were established very clearly after World War II based on the track record and goals of the Rhodes Scholarships. The Gates-Cambridge Scholarships, part of the inspiration for those actually came from the experience of Mary Gates, Bill Gates' father, senior Bill Gates' late wife, who was the chairman of our selection committee for many years in Seattle, and found it one of the most rewarding things that she did. And we helped when the Gates Scholarships were established, and more recently when the Mitchell Scholarships were established. I helped set them up and was very proud of being the original chair of their selection committee. And there are myriad other kinds of awards. But unfortunately, and again, this gets back to the fame of the scholarship, there is often too much emphasis, and I think unrealistic emphasis, just on the Rhodes Scholarship. So I hope that you can, as wonderful as it is, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, if you do feel pressure just somehow resist that and recognize there's certainly many things you can do, and I'll talk about those things, but there are also some things that you probably can't do, and hope that there can be balance in your own institutions, recognizing that there are lots of other spectacular things that in many cases are better suited to your outstanding students. I mean, obviously, the odds are very long. And again, I think because in part of the international fame of the scholarship. Just an aside, because many of you are dealing with fellowships and opportunities to take outstanding young people to institutions in the United Kingdom other than Oxford, it's no coincidence that Oxford is the most famous educational institution in the United Kingdom only in the countries in which there are Rhodes Scholarships. In any other country, Cambridge is just as famous. And in fact, as you all are seeing through your opportunities with other scholarships, there are many, many other remarkably wonderful institutions in the United Kingdom. So don't focus too much, obviously, on the Rhodes Scholarships. But as to the odds, and I also have to say, frankly, that the quality of our applicants, and I've heard from some of my colleagues in other scholarship programs that it's not the same experience, but we see that our pool of applicants, frankly, gets more qualified every year. We see no diminution whatsoever in interest or standards. And so that makes the bar higher and higher and higher all the time. We don't know exactly how many students express interest in Rhodes Scholarships each year to people like you, but based on some of the polling we've done and extrapolation, there are more than 2,000 or 3,000 who think about applying for a Rhodes Scholarship. There are about 1,500 every year who actually seek the endorsements of their colleges and universities. There are about 800 to 900 each year who get endorsed and apply. And then we interview about 180 to 200 of those, and we elect just 32. So when you look at those numbers, obviously the odds are always going to be long. And given the fact that it's an inherently subjective process, determined by the views, subjective views of the selection committees, and I'll talk about that as well, no matter how remarkable the student is, it's always to some degree a long shot. And I think that has implications for how you counsel, how you support these remarkable people. Will great counseling produce a Rhodes Scholar? I don't think so. I think on the margins, clearly, great counseling can make a difference. Will bad counseling, prevent someone from winning a Rhodes Scholarship? I'd like to believe not. And every year we see some scholars who win, who clearly have not been advantaged by the kinds of expertise and offices that all of you provide. On the other hand, there's no question that just by virtue of identifying remarkable young people and encouraging them, and especially those who do have a realistic opportunity to be competitive, to encourage them and support them is something that's absolutely invaluable. And as I said, in the context of other scholarships, I think it's enormously important that when you do that, when you identify those people, especially at institutions where there may not be a tradition or a history of successful Rhodes Scholars, people may not have enough self-esteem, or they may not self-identify themselves in ways that make them feel comfortable applying for something like this. I think it's an incredible thing that you can do for them to provide that support. But obviously, given the odds, you have to be careful in how you provide it. You want to provide other options as well.